Samuel Little confessed to 93 murders. His confessions, which spanned several decades, shocked the nation and brought to light the extent of his heinous crimes. Little's detailed recollections of each murder were chilling, providing investigators with crucial information that had been missing for years. The FBI has confirmed over 60 of these. The process of verification involved painstakingly cross-referencing Little's confessions with cold case files, interviewing witnesses, and re-examining old evidence. This monumental task required the collaboration of multiple law enforcement agencies across the country. This makes him the most prolific serial killer in American history. His ability to evade capture for so long is a testament to his cunning and the systemic failures in tracking and connecting his crimes. The sheer number of victims and the span of his killing spree are unprecedented. His victims were mostly women, many on the margins of society. These women, often overlooked and forgotten, became easy targets for Little. Their stories, once lost in the annals of unsolved cases, are now being told, shedding light on their lives and the tragic circumstances of their deaths. They were often involved in drugs or prostitution. This made them particularly vulnerable, as their disappearances were less likely to be reported or thoroughly investigated. Little exploited this vulnerability, knowing that society's indifference would work in his favor. Little preyed on their vulnerability. He would often approach his victims in a seemingly friendly manner, gaining their trust before revealing his true intentions. His predatory tactics were methodical and calculated, ensuring that he left little evidence behind. He believed their deaths were less likely to be investigated. This belief was tragically accurate, as many of his victims' cases remained cold for years, with little to no leads for investigators to follow. The lack of attention to these cases allowed Little to continue his killing spree unchecked. Little's killing spree spanned decades. From the 1970s to the early 2000s, he moved from state to state, leaving a trail of death and despair in his wake. Each decade brought new victims, and with each passing year, his confidence in evading capture grew. It stretched across multiple states. His transient lifestyle and ability to blend into different communities made it difficult for law enforcement to connect the dots. The geographical spread of his crimes added another layer of complexity to the investigation. His crimes went largely unnoticed for years. The lack of communication between different jurisdictions and the sheer volume of cases overwhelmed investigators. Many of his victims were buried in unmarked graves, their identities and stories forgotten until Little's confessions brought them back to light. This was partly due to his method of killing. He mostly strangled his victims, which left little forensic evidence. Strangulation is a silent and personal method of murder, allowing Little to maintain control over his victims until their final moments. He mostly strangled his victims, which left little forensic evidence. Little's crimes shocked America. The revelation of his actions forced a reckoning with the vulnerabilities in our society and the failures of our justice system to protect the most marginalized. They exposed the dark underbelly of society and highlighted the vulnerability of marginalized communities. The stories of his victims serve as a stark reminder of the importance of vigilance and compassion in protecting those who are most at risk. Little's legacy is a haunting testament to the consequences of societal neglect. Samuel Little was born in 1940, a time when the world was still reeling from the aftermath of the Great Depression and on the brink of World War II. His birthplace was Reynolds, Georgia, a small rural town where life was simple but often harsh. He claimed his mother was a sex worker, a fact that would cast a long shadow over his early years. Little had a troubled childhood, marked by instability and neglect. The absence of a stable family environment left him vulnerable and adrift. He was eventually sent to live with his grandmother in Ohio, but the change in scenery did little to alter his path. Little turned to crime at a young age, finding solace in delinquency as a way to cope with his turbulent life. He was in and out of juvenile detention with crimes including shoplifting and burglary. These early offenses were just the beginning of a long and dark criminal career. As Little grew older, his crimes escalated. What started as petty theft soon evolved into more serious offenses. He was arrested for assault, rape, and armed robbery, each crime more violent and disturbing than the last. His violence against women began early, a chilling precursor to the horrific acts he would later commit. Little's troubled upbringing may have contributed to his criminal path, but it cannot excuse his horrific actions. The environment he grew up in was undoubtedly harsh, but many others faced similar hardships without resorting to violence. His life serves as a stark reminder of the complex factors that can shape a criminal mind. From a young age, Samuel Little was exposed to a world of crime and violence, setting the stage for a life of brutality. Yet his story also underscores the importance of personal responsibility and the choices we make, regardless of our circumstances. Samuel Little targeted vulnerable women. These women were often overlooked by society. Many were addicted to drugs or involved in sex work. They lived on the fringes of society. Their disappearances often went unreported or unnoticed, making them easy targets for Little. Little used his charm to lure women into his car. He often promised them drugs or money, gaining their trust before taking them to secluded locations. These were often abandoned buildings or wooded areas. It was in these isolated places that Little committed his horrific crimes. Samuel Little evaded capture for decades. This was due to a number of factors. His victims were often from marginalized communities, and their disappearances didn't always raise alarm bells. Little also moved around constantly, committing crimes in multiple states. There were missed opportunities by law enforcement. Little was arrested numerous times for lesser crimes, but he was never seriously investigated for murder. His crimes were not initially linked, which allowed him to continue killing undetected. His case highlights the challenges of tracking a transient serial killer. Section 5. Faces of the Forgotten. Stories of Little's victims. The stories of Samuel Little's victims are, well, heartbreaking. Many of their names are still unknown. They were mothers, daughters, and sisters. They deserved justice. One victim, Pamela Smith, was last seen in 1970 in Florida. Another victim, Nancy Stevens, disappeared from Mississippi in 2005. Her body was found in a wooded area. It took over a decade to connect her death to Little. These women were more than just statistics. They were real people with families and lives cut short. Their stories remind us of the human cost of Little's crimes. Section 6. The Woman Who Heard Him, Bringing a Monster to Justice. In 2012, Samuel Little was arrested in Kentucky. Little, a man with a long history of criminal activity, had managed to evade justice for decades. His arrest was a turning point, but it was just the beginning of a much larger story. He was extradited to California on a drug charge. This seemingly minor charge would unravel a series of events that would bring one of America's most prolific serial killers to justice. It was there that Texas Ranger James Holland entered the picture. Holland, known for his tenacity and skill in solving cold cases, saw an opportunity where others saw a dead end. Holland specialized in cold cases. His expertise and dedication had earned him a reputation as one of the best in the field. He was determined to solve the unsolved and bring closure to the families of the victims. He knew Little was a suspect in several unsolved murders. The challenge was to get Little to talk, to confess to crimes that had long been forgotten by many, but not by the families of the victims. Holland traveled to California to interview Little. This was no ordinary interrogation. It required patience, strategy, and a deep understanding of the criminal mind. He built a rapport with the killer. Through hours of conversation, Holland managed to break through Little's defenses, creating a connection that would prove crucial. Holland listened patiently as Little confessed to murder after murder. Each confession was a piece of a dark puzzle, revealing the extent of Little's crimes. A key breakthrough came when Little revealed details about a 1994 murder in Odessa, Texas. This confession was significant because it provided concrete evidence that could be corroborated. The victim was Denise Christie Brothers. Her case had gone cold, but now there was a chance for justice. Little's confession matched the crime scene perfectly. The details he provided were too precise to be anything but the truth. This was the break Holland needed. With this confession, he could link Little to other unsolved cases, bringing hope to the families who had waited so long for answers. The journey to justice was far from over, but this was a monumental step forward. Section 7. A confession tour unraveling Little's dark deeds. With Denise Brothers' murder confirmed, Samuel Little's other confessions gained credibility. Authorities from across the country lined up to interview him. Little seemed eager to talk. He boasted about his crimes. He drew detailed portraits of his victims. The FBI created a dedicated team to investigate Little's claims. They matched his confessions to unsolved cases. The team used DNA evidence and witness accounts. Little's confession tour, as it came to be known, was macabre. However, it was crucial in providing answers to grieving families. Section 8. Justice. Delayed but not denied. Little's conviction. Samuel Little faced justice for his crimes. He was convicted in multiple states. The charges included murder and kidnapping. Prosecutors presented overwhelming evidence. This included DNA evidence, witness testimonies, and Little's own confessions. Little was sentenced to multiple life sentences without the possibility of parole. He died in prison in 2020 at the age of 80. Although justice was delayed, it was not denied. Little's convictions brought a sense of closure to the families of his victims. Section 9. The legacy of a monster. Little's impact on law enforcement. Samuel Little's case had a profound impact on law enforcement. It highlighted the need for better communication between agencies. It also emphasized the importance of taking all missing persons cases seriously. Little's crimes exposed the vulnerabilities of marginalized communities. In response to Little's case, the FBI created the Violent Criminal Apprehension Program, or VICAP. This program helps law enforcement agencies share information about violent crimes. This allows them to identify patterns and potential links between cases. Little's case serves as a chilling reminder of the importance of vigilance and collaboration in the fight against serial killers.